and AM 1350. We are WRWH, Cleveland.
This is Let's Get Growing with horticulturalist Nathan Wilson at Lanier Nursery and Gardens in Flowery Branch. Get information you need for gardening, landscaping, and home plant care. We're taking your calls right now at 706-865-3181 or email info@wrwh.com. Now, here's Nathan.
Good morning, gang. Welcome to Let's Get Growing. I am Nathan Wilson. We are sitting here in the studio, but it is a beautiful day outside to be in the garden, isn't it, though? We have seen this change in the weather. Finally, some cool weather, huh? Actually, myself and my producer, Buster, we're kind of in our light coats here this morning, a light little jacket, because it is a little chilly, and I hope that you are enjoying.
It hit me like a
yeah, huh?
Look at me not pressing my buttons. It hit me like a ton of bricks yesterday morning.
Didn't it, though,
I
Buster?
walked outside to my truck with a T-shirt on and immediately just ran back inside and had to find something.
That's right.
I came to work yesterday wrapped up in my comforter.
So you look like a little Eskimo here.
Like a little Eskimo.
In the middle of October. Well, finally, we're not even to the middle of October yet. And finally, we are feeling fall. That's really rocking and rolling. That really gets us excited. Because, you know, looking ahead at the forecast, it appears that we might have a couple more 80-degree days early next week. But then the temperatures will be in the lows, in the 50s at least, and 60s. So it's kind of a great thing. People have been asking me at the nursery, when is fall? Well, no. The question was, where is fall? And I said, well, fall is on the calendar. Of course, it began officially in September. But really, the weather itself hasn't been cooperating for us, and that does change a lot of things in the landscape. I have a lot of folks at the who come into the nursery, and they mention that their annual flowers, you know, petunias and vincas and whatnot, they are still looking gorgeous. And they said, I really just don't want to rip those out and replace them with pansies quite yet. And I said, don't, just enjoy them, because you actually have plenty of time for pansies. Since I bring it up, let's talk about that. As a matter of fact, it might still be just a hair, a little warm to plant pansies. Now, if you notice when you go to the box stores, and I'm not going to mention any names, but when you go to the box store garden centers, they've had pansies for probably 5 weeks or more. 5 weeks ago, a lady called me and said, I'm at the fill in the blank box store, and is it time to plant pansies? They look terrible. That's what they said. Well, of course, the days were in the 90s, nearly 100 degrees. The pansies were melting. They were wilting. So what did I tell her? I said, it was way too early to plant pansies, but the box stores don't care about success in your landscape, but I do. I want you to be successful. So that's why definitely let the weather get a little cooler, and you can continue to plant pansies, snapdragons, dusty millers, mums, all the way through November pretty much. As a matter of fact, you want to focus on the temperature of the soil when it comes to these pansies and the like. The temperature of the soil is what's more important than air temperature, because the air temperature is can change from minute to minute, but soil temperature changes slowly over time. Now, for pansies, you really want the soil temperature to be 65 into 45 degrees. And I say it backwards, not 45 to 65, because the temperature of the soil is really warm now, and it's going to slowly over time get cooler. So as long as the temperature of the soil is between 65 and down into 45, you can still plant pansies. Now, you ask the question, how do I know what the temperature of my soil is? Well, they do make soil thermometers that you can use around your landscape. However, you can also go to a fancy website. Just type in UGA weather. UGA for the University of Georgia, the Extension Service, and the research that's going on at the university. They have a page for weather conditions. Around the state, the university has weather stations, and these weather stations monitor air, humidity, all of the alike, but they also, because it's important for farmers, they also monitor soil temperatures, average soil temperature. So when I go to this website, I hit my location, which for me is Oakwood, but I believe there are several around the Northeast Georgia area. So find a town that's closest to where you are, and what you'll be able to do then is you'll be able to see what the average temperature of your soil is. Now, the last time I checked, which I should have checked this morning, but it was a few days ago, we were still in the 70s. So see, the temperature of the soil is still warm, even though outside we see that the weather is changing pretty quickly. So soil temperature is definitely something that you want to think about. Now, what can you do, though, as a gardener, as the maintainer of your gardens and your flower beds? What can you do to make sure that the soil temperature is where it should be? Well, you got to use mulch. That's the number one answer. Using mulch is necessary. You don't want a soil that is exposed and bare, because what happens in that case is the soil can heat up and can be very hot and can eventually lead to like root scorching of your roots. You do not want a hot soil. You want a nice, cool, temperature moderated soil, moderated temperature soil. And you do that by using mulch, because see, mulch in the summer helps to keep the soil cooler, and mulch in the wintertime helps to keep it warmer. So it helps to protect the roots one way or the other. Just like Buster mentioned, coming in with a blanket, looking like an Eskimo, keeping warm, mulch is like a blanket that you can use on the ground to keep your soil moderated, the temperature moderated. Of course, like I've mentioned in the past programs, we also have mulch doing other things like keeping moisture moderated, not too dry, not too wet. And it also helps to keep weeds down. So mulch is your friend when it comes to the landscape. I'll tell you what, I think I've talked about the mulch rule before. How thick should mulch be spread? How thick should mulch be spread? Let's keep that question open until the end of the program, and I'll let you call in and see if you remember how thick mulch should be spread. And we'll talk a little bit later about that. So if you want to give it a shot, give me a call at 706-865-3181. Again, the question of today is, what is the appropriate amount of mulch to use around your beds? How thick should that mulch be? You give me a call, and I'll give you a little bonus from Lanier Nursery and Gardens, where I operate. Now that fall's here, you are joining us for Let's Get Growing. There are plenty of things that we're going to be doing, and in the program we're going to get into that. But maybe you have missed some of our summer shows. If you've missed some of our summer shows, I want to remind you that we post them weekly on YouTube, youtube.com. Just search WRWH 93.9, and also on Facebook. Go to Facebook, search WRWH 93.9, and I want to make sure that you like WRWH's Facebook page, because we are actually streaming the program live, and you can see how bundled up and wrapped up Buster and I are, and we'll wave to you folks at Facebook. But you can also listen on the go on TuneIn. TuneIn is an app on your phone, your smartphone, that you can download. It's a free app. You just search WRWH. You make it your favorite station, because it already is, and you can listen live there. Of course, always remember, WRWH.com is the webpage. Now, if you've got a burning question in your garden, just give me a call, 706-865-3181. Folks, I'll be here till 10 o'clock, so you got plenty of time. Last week, I promised you that my friend Cody Gambrell, who is on the horticulture staff at Walt Disney World in Orlando, he was planning to be on, and I talked with him last night. We've been keeping in touch this week. I'll tell you what, folks, the hurricane that came through has really done some damage, even down there in Orlando, where he's located around Walt Disney World. So I have foregone him being on the program. He says cell service is sketchy. They may not have power for a few weeks. He says thank the Lord for generators, because that's what's keeping them going. However, we will get him back on the air to give us secrets about Walt Disney World and how you can make your landscape look as beautiful as the gardens there in the Disney parks. Now, so definitely hang on tight for a couple of weeks for that. Cody was mentioning that down in Orlando, the hurricane has just the winds, the sheer winds. He put some videos on Facebook that we were able to look at, and they have just ripped things apart. His the siding on his house, the screening on his porch. You know, you think that screening has holes in it, that the wind still picked up and ripped it all to pieces. But the main thing he was worried about is the canopy, and that's important because here in the Northeast Georgia mountains we have a beautiful canopy. Of course, down in Orlando it's mainly a swamp there, but they have canopy as well, and canopy is important for the ecology and the environment, as well as it is up here. Down there, it has just been ripped to shreds by Hurricane Michael, and they're definitely going to be set back as far as plantings and horticulture. But you know, of course, we have heard the reports of lives being lost, which are more important than plants, obviously. However, so I told Cody, just hang on tight. I'll let you do what you got to do down there. We'll make sure that cell service is restored and that you're doing okay. All right. So with that in mind, folks, again, we are going to be here answering your questions, 706-865-3181. We've already got our first question of the day from Bonnie in Cleveland, who, as a matter of fact, just sits about 20 feet or steps away from where I am right now. And Bonnie was wondering this morning, she says, when will we be able to stop cutting our grass? Well, the good news, Bonnie, is that we are getting very close. If you have a Bermuda lawn, it is not going to like the cool weather. It is not going to like the change in weather, that is for sure. And so the reality is that what we need to do is we need to probably go ahead and cut it one more time, let it hang out. It probably won't grow too much. As we get down deeper into the 40s at nighttime, you'll see that the Bermuda grass in particular, that grass will be going dormant, be turning brown, and it won't need to be cut anymore. But regardless, the reality is we probably got a few more weeks that we can cut and do things. We don't want to cut it too late. If it's too green, you might have a frost, you might see some winter damage. But generally, you know, this summer has just been extremely long, and I think that we're going to be finally getting out of that. So things are changing for sure. I've noticed even if you look out at your landscape maybe and you have a redbud tree, I want you to see if your redbud is blooming. Redbud is a great native plant with these nice pea-shaped flowers. They're pink, purplish, and they make a great ornamental tree for the landscape. However, I've noticed at the nursery that we've got a few of our redbuds that are blooming now. Now, they should be blooming next spring, but their buds have already opened. So that we may see a little bit of damage with the extended season and warm season that we've had. Of course, in the nursery, we water and whatnot, and it can encourage a little growth. But at your place, you don't need to be watering this time of year. You don't need to be fertilizing, and definitely not pruning. I'm going to talk more about that a little later. But these are things that you don't have to do at this point. But going forward, of course, we kind of want to monitor and see what the weather is going, how kind of impact it's going to have on our gardens. Folks, because Cody is not going to be here with a report from Walt Disney World and I can't pick his brain on that, later on in the show, I'm going to go through the history and perhaps the future of landscaping in Georgia. So I definitely want you to hold on tight until we get to that next half hour, because horticulture and gardening has been has played a vital role in our economy and our culture. So folks, I want you to hang on tight as we go through just a short break, and we'll be right back, and I'll answer some more gardening questions.
Nothing to do? How about learning something like photography, gardening, cooking, public speaking, or training a dog? How about spending some time with senior citizens or helping young people grow and learn? There's plenty to do, and it's all in 4-H. White County 4-H is for kids from 9 to 19, kids who want to make new friends, learn some life skills, and have lots of fun. Call the White County Extension Office and find out about 4-H as we celebrate National 4-H Week, October 7th through the 13th. I'm Brianna Fortner, and since I've joined 4-H, I've found plenty to do.
The dogs play here.
The kick is blocked.
Listen this Saturday.
Sponsored in part by Cobb Vantris, a proud supporter of the University of Georgia. By Tim Hunt, State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. North Georgia Tire and Auto Care Center, offering great selection of tires at discount prices. Cleveland Diesel, providing service and parts for all makes and models. White County Farmers Exchange. Check out their Georgia Bulldog products. By ARI, providing auto repair excellence. Adams Foods IGA, let us help you with your tailgate parties. is Jackie Jones Ford. Now's the time for a new Ford by Zap Cooling and Heating. Your family's comfort is our top priority at Zap Express Mart. Get the coldest beer and cheapest prices at Express Mart. By Turner Tire and Auto Repair, and by Barrett Used Cars on the lot or barrettusedcars.com. Back to more Let's Get Growing with Nathan Wilson.
All right, so we've already plowed right through our first segment. Plow, no pun intended, because plowing is an essential part of horticulture and agriculture. And agriculture and horticulture gardening has played a vital role in Georgia in culture and whatnot. And in the next half hour, I'll talk a little more about the history of gardening in Georgia, the history of landscaping in Georgia. But I do need to jump right in and answer a question of one of our great listeners, of course, and customers at the Nursery Victoria. Asked last week for me to address this question, and I failed to. We ran out of time, but I wanted to make sure that I get an answer. Was basically a discussion she wanted me to have on tropical milkweeds. We've talked about milkweed a lot on the program throughout the summer, primarily because milkweed is a great source of not just nectar, but also it's a host plant for butterfly larvae. And it's very important for the monarch butterfly in particular. Now, monarchs solely feed their young, at least, the young monarchs solely feed on milkweeds. Now, they will feed on milkweeds that are native to our area, like butterfly weed or milkweed, swamp milkweed. There's a green one. There's several different colors and size and types. There's a common milkweed that really runs around the Northeast. However, these are things that are grown natively here, okay? However, there are tropical milkweeds, which come from South America and down into those zones where they don't get as much frost as we do, so they don't really last as long. But there are some issues when you start using tropical milkweed. There's two main points that we want to think about. Number one, the tropical milkweed will actually have leaves on it later in the year, early in the year, when our native milkweeds don't. So monarchs may hang around on those plants, and then when cool temperatures come in, they too get zapped by the cold, the monarch butterflies themselves. So what tropical milkweeds can do is they can, if it's a year like this year particularly, they can have monarchs lingering around our gardens when monarchs need to be going and migrating down to warmer climates into Mexico. So they can prevent the migration of the monarch and actually cut their numbers down because they can't handle the cool temperatures that we're going to be getting. Then also there's another problem is that they can be killed by it's called the OE parasite. It's a disease, of course, that infects monarchs, and it can, if the monarchs linger too long in one place. So tropical milkweed really throws off the migration of monarchs, which is extremely important. And it can lead to a parasitic disease, which is not good for the monarchs. So when you go into the box stores, if you go there, which I don't encourage you to, but if you do go into the box stores, make sure you're not buying tropical milkweed. Out at Lanier Nursery and Gardens in Oakwood, Flowery Branch, Georgia, where we sell our native milkweeds. And of course, those are a much safer choice to use if your purpose is to attract monarchs and you want to bring monarchs into your landscape. So Victoria, I'm glad you brought that up. I hadn't thought about discussing that, but we definitely want to make sure that when we're planting for nature, that we're not deterring nature and we're not causing problems for nature. Today, as we move forward, I want to talk about failure. Now, I'm not talking about failure in a negative sense. We want to be positive. We want to be positive.
So we're not
Buster?
talking about me for once.
No, we're not talking about Buster. Buster,
Thank
you're
you.
not failure. We are talking about failure in the landscape, not failure in other businesses. But anyhow, what we're talking about is trying to turn failures into successes, because we do want to think positively. We do want to think positively. A joke I always say, and I asked Buster this morning, I'm like, hey, Buster, you live in the dream. You live in the dream. Well, nightmares are dreams too. That's not really a positive way of thinking, is it? A positive way of thinking is we're going to do better in the landscape. Next year, we're going to put out pre-emergent at the right time so that we don't have weeds in the landscape. We're going to prune at the right time so we don't have problems in the landscape. I want to talk about, in response to failure, Thomas Jefferson, our third president of the United States. He was, did you know, Buster, that when he was nominated to become president of the United States, on the nomination form, he wrote his occupation as farmer. The third president, and of course the first one was as well, George Washington.
I guess you learn something new every day. I had no idea about that.
And I guess the last president who we had who was a farmer was maybe Jimmy Carter.
That's who I would guess. Peanut farmer from Georgia.
I'm sure Bush had some cattle.
Now, as a gardening man yourself, how does it make you feel when somebody refers to it kind of in a denigrating style way? Yeah. He's just nothing but a peanut farmer. Yep. How does that make you feel as a bit of a farmer yourself?
It infuriates me and makes me want to throw peanuts at him, for real.
I thought so. Because I need to get passionate about this subject.
Okay, now that we're on this subject, thanks for diverting us here. Now we're on this subject. I want to stress how important agrarianism is. Agrarianism is a stream of thought. It's a lifestyle. Living in the country, growing your crops, growing animals for slaughter, for food. Agrarianism is where we started as a nation, as a fledgling nation, and we really were going strong, especially in the South because of our great climate. We have a long extended growing season as opposed to up north. So we see, and we're going to talk about this later too, Buster. In
what other reasons why the South would do well with agriculture?
Well, we have a great source of water as well. 52 inches of rain a year, unless there's a drought.
You're a great show host.
Unless a drought. But we are filled with great topography and soil. You know, people really want to talk about how bad clay soil is. Clay soil is rough, right? But really, it holds on to nutrition, it holds on to moisture, things that the coastal plain soils in Georgia just can't do, so they have to use more irrigation in the dry times. We are really going left and right here, aren't we, Buster? But it's great because Thomas Jefferson
I think you're doing a great job of keeping it between the lines. I think you know what I'm talking about.
We could go too far left or too far right, I guess, but we're going to get back to the failures. Thomas Jefferson, our third president, who was a farmer, he said that the failure of one thing is repaired by the success of another. Now, that's a good way, I think, to approach things. You know, think about all the plants that Thomas Jefferson himself, based on that quote, was aware of that he lost. You know, people come to the nursery and they get really upset about losing plants. Well, we have to keep in mind a few things. We have to keep in mind that in agriculture, in gardening rather, we're dealing with plants, and plants are living organisms. You are dealing with living organisms. You and I, we're both living. We know we can succumb to disease, and of course, eventually, we will pass away from this earth. But living organisms, just like our beloved pets and squirrels outside and mushrooms on the ground, they all have a life cycle. They all have a life expectancy as well. Now, sometimes the failure isn't really your fault. Keeping in mind it's a living organism, it could be the result of an ever-enduring battle of nature. Just something is vying for domination in the landscape. A disease may come in, perhaps the cultural conditions, lack of water, maybe too much water. All of these could be reasons for failure. And just like old T. Jefferson says, when something fails, don't forget the things that succeeded. When something fails, don't forget the things that succeeded, because as we go into winter, you may see some winter damage. When we get into summer next year, you may see things drying out. But the reality is look at the things, be on the positive side. Look at the things that are growing, that are doing well. And I think that you will find comfort in those things. Now, that sounds like a little sermon, doesn't it? Sounds like a little.
This Jefferson fella sounds like he's pretty smart.
He was pretty smart. He
like
really
he could have started
a
country or something.
It's like he started a country or something. It's like he declared independence for all Americans, all people around the world, really, right? We can get into freedom, but I would rather get into freedom about the landscape, freedom about the landscape, and being free from these failures, Do you know that one of the biggest causes of garden failures in planting a tree, the research shows that one of our biggest failures is soil amendments. And I've talked about this on the show before, but I want to remind you, because fall is the time to plant trees and shrubs, I want to remind you not to use soil amendment, even in clay. Don't use soil amendment whenever you're planting your tree or shrub. If you're planting a perennial bed or an annual bed, they don't have these extensive root systems like trees and shrubs. So it's not as big of a deal. You can create a nice bed. You can add as much organic matter, manure, compost. Thomas Jefferson loved manure, by the way, as did John Adams and George Washington. They all loved manure because they knew the benefits of it. But in a tree hole or in a shrub hole, it's not really ideal to use soil amendment. Here's what happens, folks. Soil amendment creates a coarse soil. However, the soil that we have in our native soil up here in the Piedmont particularly is clay, and it's a very fine soil and not very coarse at all. It's the finest kind of soil you can find. That's kind of weird. Finest kind of soil you can find. But whenever you change the texture of the soil and take the very fine clay soil and add the soil amendments and create a coarse soil, you're actually creating this condition where the clay soil can pull water away from the amended hole. The research shows that the clay soil is like little straws, and they're just sucking water away from the root ball around your newly amended soil. So you can create these kind of dry pockets right around the roots of your plant. Not a good situation. Not a good situation at all. Right where the roots are located, you want moisture, not dryness. So this is why I don't recommend using soil amendment for trees and shrubs. Now, I want to say one more thing about this that really just makes me sad. There was an individual who told me that they dig out all of the existing soil when they plant and they replace it with something like Miracle-Gro potting soil or container soil. Folks, there's a reason it says potting and container on it. It is meant for a pot and container. It's not meant for the ground. They're made of peat moss, particularly peat moss, and peat moss is not a good situation to add with clay. It's kind of like building a brick. Back in the days when the Israelites were building bricks for the Egyptians, you needed clay and you needed organic matter. They used wheat straw or some kind of straw, and you mix that together. You let it bake in the hot sun like we have in the summer, and you get a brick. So welcome to even more problems in the landscape. Never replace the soil. There's only one case when I would say remove all of your soil, and that is if you have some terrible disease issue in the soil. But most likely you don't. Most likely that would be a very extreme case, and you would have to remove a lot of soil for that. But when you're planting this trees and shrub this year, make sure you soften the soil. Make sure you dig a super wide hole, 3 times as wide as the root ball of the tree itself. But don't add anything to the soil. I do sell soil amendments, but I tell people up front what the research shows, and then I allow them to make their own decision. So, folks, that would be the number one reason you would fail in planting a tree or shrub this fall, is adding that soil amendment. And I don't want you to fail. Remember, the failure of a thing is repaired by the success of another. And that's what I want to do here today, is give you success and tips for success. So hang on really tight, and you can give me a call if you have a problem. 706-865-3181. I'll be glad to guide you down the path of success. We'll be right back with more Let's Get Growing.
Questions about your retirement deserve more than just a call center. Hi, I'm Rick Kempling, your local Edward Jones financial advisor located in Cleveland. Let me show you the difference personal attention can make when it comes to your goals. Contact me at 706-865-0933. That's 706-865-0933. Personal attention. That's how Edward Jones makes sense of investing. Edward Jones, member SIPC.
This is Brian Alexander with Barrett Funeral Home. At Barrett Funeral Home, we're White County's only locally owned and operated funeral home. For over 40 years, we have provided comfort to those in need. Call today with any questions you may have about planning funeral arrangements. Call us at 706-865-3101 or visit our website at barrettfh.com today. Barrett Funeral Home, 118 North Brook Street, Cleveland.
One of the greatest things an individual can do to support his or her local community is to patronize the businesses. Your White County Chamber of Commerce encourages you to shop White County first. Shop local, support local. When you support local merchants, you support local jobs, help to keep your taxes lower, and fund city and county improvement projects with SPLOST tax dollars spent here. Live local, be local, buy local, shop White County first.
As the weather gets cooler, the savings get hotter at Nick's Hardware and Furniture. Right now is the time to save and get end-of-season closeout deals on all in-stock Snapper zero-turn mowers. Stop in and see the selection and talk with Charlie and Bradley. They're offering you $100 over dealer cost on the remaining mower. Also, check out their selection of Echo leaf blowers and chainsaws for fall yard work. Remember, all equipment is assembled and serviced ready to use. Nick's Hardware and Furniture on the Square, downtown Cleveland.
Sunny, northwest winds 10 to 15, highs low 70s. Tonight mostly clear, becoming mostly cloudy, lows lower 50s. Then tomorrow partly sunny, 20% chance of showers, low 70s, slight chance of showers Sunday night. Monday partly sunny, a slight chance of showers, high mid 70s. Tuesday chance of showers, slight chance of thunderstorms, highs upper 70s. Georgia meteorologist John Weatherby in the GNN Weather Center.
More great information coming your way on Let's Get Growing with Nathan Wilson.
All right, so we just got back here and we were just talking about failures in the landscape, failures in the garden. I want to give you one more tip of preventing failure with gardening that relates to houseplants. I just had a discussion with some clients where I work at Lanier Nursery and Gardens in Flowery Branch, and they had some houseplants and there was some failure going on. And I think I helped diagnose the problem, because I can tell you that the number one killer of houseplants. What do you think the number one killer of houseplants is? The number one killer. What do you think, Buster? I see your wheels are spinning.
Lack of attention.
Lack of attention. Okay, sort of. I would say too much attention. The number one killer is overwatering.
Really?
Giving the plant too much water. Most of the time, actually, I had two folks come in this past week. One guy had a bonsai and the leaves were falling off. The soil, the root, let's see, I've shaken the stem of the plant. The roots were not really holding the plant, which means there was some rot going on. So I knew right away, and then the soil was very moist. I said, how often do you water this? Every day. You don't have to water your houseplants every day. They're not using as much water inside as they are as your plants.
See, I would have known that.
Containers. Right. You just think they need water.
If I in some alternate universe, if I ever bought a house plant,
yeah,
I would have just added another plant to the victims list.
Oh man,
I'd have been dumping water in that thing every time I walked by it.
You would be the gardening most wanted.
I'm an ignorant fool, man.
It's all right. Well, I'm going to educate you. So here's how we do this. Why is overwatering done? Well, overwatering is done primarily because we think that they need water all the time. Just like Buster and I were talking about. We don't know what they need. But it's overdone and it leads to wilt. It leads to wilt, and so when it wilts, we think that the plant needs water, when actually the same wilting that lack of water shows is the same wilt that overwatering can show. So it's this endless cycle of watering, wilting, never getting better. Here's how you need to properly water your landscape. Water your houseplants. It's better to infrequently water but deeply water than to frequently water but shallowly water. In other words, just sprinkling little water on the top every day is not a good situation. But letting the plant maybe dry out a bit and placing it in the sink, that's what I would recommend as number 2, is place your plant in the sink or the bathtub, water it there, let it drain completely, and then put it back on its pan or its little pad to keep your floor from getting wet. Don't water your houseplants directly into the pad unless you know exactly how much water that plant requires. You never ever want your containerized houseplant to sit in water, because it's like a septic swamp in the bottom of that pot. If your little container that you buy at the box stores has a attached saucer, Don't ever let that saucer be filled with water. You only want to use the saucer as a preventative to keep your floor, whether it's carpet or hardwood or tile or whatever, from getting wet. You don't want your floor to get wet, but you don't want your plant just sitting in water, or you will slowly rot the roots out of your plant. Now, you're going to have to get a high-tech piece of equipment if you want to do this right. I want you to monitor the moisture in your soil with this high-tech piece of equipment. And that is your forefinger. Use your forefinger. Everybody, well, I don't know. I shouldn't say everybody's got one. That would be not always the truth. But use your forefinger, stick it into the container. And if the top few inches are moist, then you're okay with water. So monitor before you water. Monitor before you water. If you stick your finger into the top few inches of the soil in the container and there is no moisture, it's pretty dry, you could probably water again. But again, water deeply and infrequently rather than shallowly and frequently. Now, the other thing is you do need to know your plant. You do need to know the plant that you're using. There was an individual who came in and asked about citrus. They had a Meyer lemon, and the Meyer lemon wasn't doing so well. It was wilting, and I automatically thought about overwatering. But I also know that with citrus, they do not like wet feet. You can actually let citrus dry out in between. Allowing citrus to dry in between waterings is perfectly all right. They can handle it. They are perfectly cool with that. And again, you want to place it in a sink when you do water and let it completely drain through. But then on the other hand of things, knowing your plant is important. Fiddle leaf fig. Fiddle leaf fig has been a very popular plant lately. It's like all over Pinterest with the shiplap and the white walls and the gray walls that people are using today. You put a fiddle leaf fig with a gray container in front of your white shiplap wall, and you've got the Joanna Gaines style going on. But the fiddle leaf figs are beautiful plants. But if they dry out in between waterings, they will have these large brown patches. They do like humidity. They do like moisture. And so they can create these large brown patches. So you don't, in that case, you don't want to let them dry out too far, or you may see these failures going on in houseplants. So folks, we've talked a little bit about failures in the landscape and now in houseplants. In an alternative world, Buster is going to do great with his houseplant in this hypothetical world we're talking about. But remember what Thomas Jefferson said: the failure of one thing is repaired by the success of another. You will have success in the landscape, and you will do beautifully. And if you don't, you know where to come. Come to Let's Get Growing right here on WRWH every Saturday at 9 a.m. And again, I want to remind you before we get into our next discussion on the history of landscaping in Georgia, that if you've missed any of our shows, you can find them on YouTube or on Facebook. Just go to youtube.com, go to your Facebook account, and search WRWH, and you'll be able to find all of our shows right there. All of our great summer shows are located on those two sites. And, of course, the TuneIn app is great because it's free, and you can make WRWH your favorite station, and you can listen to all the great programming here on WRWH right there on your smartphone. That's the TuneIn app. Give us a call today, 706-865-3181. If you have a question, and I'll be glad to answer. But I do want to move into my promised history of landscaping in Georgia. It's going to be a brief history because I am over talking, that's for sure. I want to get started before we go to break, but we'll definitely get back into it. So when did you know that Georgia started out? Okay, Georgia started out as a place for landscaping and horticulture, agriculture. Before cotton came along, Georgia started out as a colony to produce silk. The fabric that is highly prized, feels really good as a bed sheet or as a clothing, I guess. We started out as it was the #1 crop in Georgia for a while, and mulberry trees were being planted. The silkworm was coming along because that's what the silkworm uses, is a mulberry plant in order to produce the silk. Okay, here we go. The silk is actually the excrement, or this kind of web-like that the silkworm produces, and then that is collected from the mulberry trees and is spun into fiber. Now, when was the first garden in Georgia installed, and where was it located? The first garden in Georgia was called and is still known as the Trustees Garden. The trustees of the fledgling colony, it was a garden was created, and you can go there and you could do it today if you wanted to, because the Trustees Garden is located in Athens, Georgia, on the North Campus of the University of Georgia, and it was first created in 1734. So you see how far back we go with wonderful horticulture in Georgia. Now, eventually, silk went to the wayside and long fiber cotton became king, especially along the coast where most settlements were anyhow. Savannah and that old South area. Now, we also were growing rice and false indigo, and of course, false indigo is used to dye the long fiber cotton. So it was an integrated system here, and people continued to grow that, and wealth became so abundant in the South, because as Buster and I were talking about in the first segments, we were talking about why agriculture is so important to Georgia and why we can produce so much horticulture, so many gardening and growing. And that's because of our conditions, of course, that we talked about, our environmental conditions. But of course, cotton is still a big part of the Georgia industry. And as a matter of fact, not to make an aside, but the Commissioner of Agriculture, Gary Black, said this week that a bunch of cotton was a complete failure because of Hurricane Michael. It completely cut the plants down to the ground, made a wad of cotton, and they won't be able to harvest it. It will make it hard to gin if it can be harvested. And so we definitely need to be praying for those cotton farmers in middle and South Georgia. Now, as we move out of that kind of early colonial period in Georgia, we go into the antebellum period. The antebellum, of course, is before war. That's exactly what antebellum means, before war. And that was before the Civil War broke out. The South, and particularly Georgia, was becoming very affluent, very wealthy, and we see people spending money on highly maintained gardens, particularly a garden style called parterre. And you can look that up, parterre garden. Parterres are gardens that you can go to. I know in the program we had a lady from Hills and Dales, Joe Phillips from Hills and Dales. There are some parterres there. But you say, what is parterre? Well, it's a French word, so I'm going to have to explain it. Parterre is where you plant, particularly with boxwoods. You use boxwoods, or you can use a numberous different types of plants. But back in the day, boxwoods were very popular. And you form geometric designs and patterns. Very formal, very European. And of course, during the antebellum period, people were building Greek revival homes. You see the old terra plantations. They had the huge columns, and we were pulling from the Europeans as far as our horticulture goes and our architecture goes. So you see these geometric patterns and boxwoods being shaped and other plants being shaped. Now, this type of gardening shows off the level of education, the level of wealth, the level of ability to commit land to a garden. I mean, if you were like me, just a poor dirt farmer, you couldn't commit the kind of land to a garden of that size or nature. But then we see some drastic changes happening. We see some drastic changes happening around the Civil War. Hysteria breaks out, the Civil War comes on, and gardening in Georgia changes completely. Hang on tight to find out just how gardening changes after the Civil War.
Do you want healthy choices in a clean and friendly environment? We have it here at Captain D's. Choose from grilled salmon, grilled tilapia, grilled shrimp, or grilled chicken, and side choices that include green beans, steamed broccoli, baked potatoes, and fresh green salads. All served in a restaurant with an excellent health department rating. Now that's a healthcare plan that I like. I'm Jim McClure at Captain D's.
We're just cooking in the kitchen.
The skills you can develop as a soldier in the Army National Guard can give you an edge in the high-tech job market of tomorrow. The Guard offers career training to take advantage of your skills in science, technology, engineering, and math that can help give you a leg up to a high-paying and rewarding STEM profession. Gain practical experience with emerging technology and equipment not found in the civilian world. The Army National Guard can get you started in an array of STEM-related career fields such as information technology, communication systems, Special Forces engineers, technical engineering, air traffic control, and chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear science. Get a head start on your career in an exciting new field while earning money to pay for college, all while serving in your own community. Log on to NationalGuard.com or talk to a recruiter in your area to learn about all of the STEM career opportunities available to you in the Army National Guard. Sponsored by the Georgia Army National Guard, aired by the Georgia Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Back to more Let's Get Growing with Nathan Wilson.
Okay, so I left you hanging off there around the Civil War. Of course, we've been talking about the history of landscaping, of gardening in Georgia, and how Georgia began as a colony, really with horticulture, growing of mulberry plants, growing of cotton later on, rice, indigo, things like that. And of course, we talked about antebellum period of the affluency and the kind of wealth that were formed with the parterre gardens or the geometric gardens that were designed, much like you would see in Europe. But then, of course, I mean, basically these boxwood gardens were the lawn of their time. See, the lawn today shows that you have time and money to invest in your landscape. And back in those days, the boxwood gardens were basically like the lawn of today. But of course, Civil War breaks out, and we don't need to have a history on the Civil War, but the influence it had on gardening was tumultuous. Of course, the South and Georgia, being in the South, was put into turmoil for 100 years. We see, like even when my grandmothers were born, my grandparents were born in the 30s during the Great Depression, the Civil War, the South was still recovering from the effects of the Civil War. And so very little time was spent on gardening. Very little money, effort was spent on gardening. Of course, the antebellum gardens of old went to ruin. They overgrew. They became woodlands, perhaps. They became pasture lands, whatever. But very little time was spent in gardening. Of course, from the Civil War up until World War II, the South and then Georgia was just gardening for sustenance, just gardening just to live, just to provide for the family. And when World War II kicks in, we see a crazy change that lasts with us today. This change that we're talking about was the invention, or the development rather maybe, of subdivisions. Subdivisions were being built, and now you had people living not on the farm and not in the city in apartments or condominium type homes, but now they're living somewhere in between the country and the city. And these subdivisions are being built in areas that once used to be pasture land or farmland. And, everybody has their own lots. And of course, you and I are very familiar with subdivisions. Perhaps we even live in a subdivision. But the invention of subdivisions after World War II goes all the way through the 60s and beyond. And what happens during the 1960s and beyond, the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, is we see more development, more people obviously, populations are booming after World War II with the baby boomers. People are purchasing homes by the time they get into their 20s and 30s. And we see more subdivisions being grown. Of course, the lawn becomes very important. The lawn becomes the quintessential emerald green carpet, wall-to-wall carpet. In the house, well, there's wall-to-wall carpet out in the lawn in the form of this nice green from the street to your front door with your lawns. And so that becomes very important. And also, we see subdivisions in the 80s and 90s expecting a high quality of great landscaping. Pretty much the subdivisions in Georgia, with their landscaping and the high quality that was being demanded, set an example for the South. And you can pretty much thank Georgia for the beautiful landscaping that goes on in the subdivisions around the Southeast. Now we get into the 90s. As we get into the 90s, people are still wanting horticulture. They still, actually, we see new homes being highly popular. We're not just buying homes anymore that were already built. We're wanting a new home, our own place, and obviously that gives rise to landscape companies. So now it's no longer, mom and pop going out and printing their own shrubs, the landowners printing their own things. They want someone to come in and to do the landscape for them. And this is a vital and key aspect, because that's great for me being in the nursery industry. That's great for us because now the nursery industries have grown since the 90s. There have been great breeding programs since the 90s, in particular. Newer plants that are smaller for the landscape, not so overly sized, so they require so much maintenance. But the 90s was a key role. Now, here is a time period, right in the 1995, 1996. I was still yet just a lad and don't remember too much of it, but the Olympics coming to Atlanta. Do you remember that? When the Olympics came to Atlanta.
I remember that goofy looking Izzy.
Don't you? Izzy was wonderful, wasn't it? We had a little Izzy doll. And I mean, Atlanta put a lot of money, Georgia put a lot of money into the Olympics, which every city kind of has to. But the Olympics actually changed the way we garden in the South, and you may not even have realized it. Let's talk a little bit about 285. When 285 was landscaped in the 90s, it was landscaped. These plantings were put in for the Olympics. Obviously, when the Olympics come to town, you don't want to have your town looking kind of mundane and mediocre. You know, sure, you've got your great pine trees and your white oaks, but what else is going on? Well, along 285, you'll see maybe some of the original landscape plantings, but a lot of places around metro area have been redone. But that kind of set an example for what you can do on the on and off ramps on 285, 985, now 85, 75. They all somewhere have these beautiful swaths of landscape plants. If you remember, Centennial Olympic Park was put into place for that reason. And you can go there and you can enjoy horticulture. You can enjoy gardening right there at Centennial Olympic Park. And so that was another big aspect of how the Olympics changed the way that we garden. Probably one of the very first gardens in inner city, other than Central Park in New York, but of course one of the most now important parks in Atlanta. Also, large container plants were being demanded in the Olympics times. Because the Olympics needed high impression, we needed something to look good right ahead, immediately. Nursery people started bumping up plants from little pots into 15-gallon, 20-gallon, 30-gallon containers. And now that's kind of set a precedent and standard. Most people who are looking for impression, immediate impact in the landscape, they want these larger container plants. And we can thank the Olympics for that. Also, another kind of container plant that became popular around the Olympics in the 90s was the mixed container. You know, nowadays they're kind of become commonplace, but we have these huge, large containers and we fill them full of plants that are, give you color, texture, shape, contrast, and they just spill over. Perhaps they're hanging baskets and they're 24 inches wide. You'll see those, and it's all because of the impact that these Olympics had in Georgia, particularly around Atlanta. Now, we're getting close to heading out for the show, but I want to remind you of just recently in the 2000s. The 2000s, you may not realize it, but it changed drastically the way that we garden. In the 2000s, there was a problem, right? It was called the recession. We had a recession in the 2000s. The housing market just plummeted. Unemployment skyrocketed. You had a case where people were not buying homes. They didn't have the money to buy. They didn't have jobs. And so what happens then is that gardening was not quite as important. It wasn't quite as important. We kind of did see a strong interest, though, in people going green. If you remember, people wanted organic foods. They wanted local. They wanted to grow it themselves. And that made a big impact today, because still we have people who are looking for blueberry plants, fruit trees. They wanted to grow things at home. And so we may not have seen as much planting of, shrubbery and trees and whatnot, but we did see people planting for food production and for sustenance, which of course, after the Civil War, we saw that happen. If you remember, it's funny how history will repeat itself. But people kind of backed off on using landscaping companies, maybe not backed off so much as the prices became even more competitive during the recession. And landscape companies, they changed the way that they did business. They offered more services. They offered more types, just expanded their business into doing other things. They were blowing leaves, mowing, doing all of these, providing chemical controls that they may not have done before. And so things really changed. Now, there was an increase of new projects and trying to save money. But that kind of brings us up to today. And here we are. And the question is, now that we've done a brief history of the landscape in Georgia, is what will the future look like? What will the future look like? Of course, we have a number of folks who are retiring. I know that a position I held at the State Department of Agriculture was because of a lady who retired. That may affect the baby boomers now getting out and growing more. We absolutely want to be here to answer questions as we continue to go forward. But what will the future of gardening look like? That is the question. So I'm glad that we were able to talk a little bit about that. Donna on Facebook, I want to make sure I can get the last question in so that before we wrap up, has a question about when's the best time to plant evergreen trees and the best time to mulch around your home to prevent pests. I would say the best time to plant trees is now, Donna. We're getting this cool weather. You can go ahead and do that now all the way through winter, as long as the ground is not frozen. As long as the ground is not frozen, you can plant evergreen trees, shrubs, perennials, whatever you want to do. Now, mulching, I would mulch right after you plant. Mulch and remember our question from earlier was what's the best rate to mulch at? Here's the answer, folks. 2 inches. 2 inches thick. But when you mulch, Donna, be sure to keep it 2 inches away from the base of the plant. Be sure to keep it 2 inches away from the base of the plant. So the key with mulching is 2 by 2. Just like Noah went on the ark, we mulch 2 by 2, 2 inches thick and 2 inches away from the base of the plant. Folks, this has been a wild and crazy show. I'm glad you're able to join us. In a couple of weeks, I'll have Cody back on from Walt Disney World. But until then, be sure to check us out on YouTube and on Facebook. WRWH, Let's Get Growing. Folks, we'll be here next week at 9 o'clock. We'll see you then.
Thanks for joining us for today's Let's Get Growing program with Nathan Wilson. If you have a comment about today's program, you can reach out to Nathan by sending an email to grow@laniernursarygardens.com. Join us next Saturday for Let's Get Growing on Local News Radio 93.9 FM and AM 1350.
The Warriors on Friday, the Dogs on Saturday.
Sweet, man.
93.9 FM and 1350 AM. WRWH, Cleveland.